A Roman numeral 4, just a quick review. We talked about what is good. That's called moral semantics. How do we talk about what is good? Hopefully that rings a bell a little bit. We talked about descriptive moral semantics, which is just what those terms mean and how languages use them. We have foundational moral semantics, which is why those words mean what they mean. That's a pretty abstract thing, but we moved ahead. That's what that means. Letter B, what does good mean? And here I'm just using a standard common sense definition. Good typically refers to something that's desirable, beneficial, or having positive qualities. The opposite is bad or evil. And that's usually what it is. So when I use good, I mean that way, things we want. Letter C, moral value versus moral duty. This really matters. Moral values are the intrinsic worth or goodness of something. That's what a moral value is. Respect, empathy, loyalty, generosity, gratitude, honesty. These things are moral values. Moral duties are the obligations, what we need to do in that situation. For example, a moral value of honesty is a moral value no matter what you say and do. It doesn't mean you're always supposed to tell the truth necessarily, which we'll talk about that. That's a duty, that's a moral obligation. And so moral values are different moral duties, and we'll make those distinctions. I will all the time. And then I said, which duty is good? Which one should you do? Well, that's the whole point of the rest of the part of the whole study. The whole rest of the study is going to answer that question because it depends on which prescriptive ethics you use. Then row number 5, why be good in the first place? Why be good in the first place? Well, that's also what will explain the rest of the study because it depends on which prescriptive ethics you employ. Why be good? You see, Christian says because we ought to. Why? And so we'll talk about how you fill in the blanks there. Okay, so now we're going to talk about where does morality come from? Where does morality come from? And this is what we call moral ontology. Moral ontology. Ontology, ontos from Greek means being. Ontology means the study of being. If something, you can't hardly get more abstract than that in philosophy is ontology. What does it mean to exist, to be? That's called ontology. Moral ontology sometimes is also called, this is maybe a more helpful term if you're not used to the word ontology, is grounding. Is grounding. So where does good come from? What's it grounded in? What's the source? This is a very important, this is where most debates happen with atheists and ethics. This is where the rubber meets the road for most of us. This is where we disagree, tremendously disagree with most atheists, or naturalists at least. Where does good come from? That's moral ontology. Okay, so there are basically 4 or 5 major answers to this question, basically, okay? And so the number one, one answer that people say is where do moral values come from? One's going to say, well, the science or the scientific method. Well, I'm going to show you my hand. I don't find that persuasive. Well, the question is, what possible scientific apparatus would demonstrate what I ought to do? How do you show that in a laboratory? I mean, how much does justice weigh? What's the color of honesty? I mean, what apparatus would you use? What telescope how would you possibly get to tell me what I ought to do? But yet this is a number one answer by the normal person on the street. Well, science, it's logical, moral logical nonsense. It just makes no sense, but it's a common answer. A second answer is, well, like science means the scientific method, rather. Letter B would be naturalism. Naturalism is a belief that everything exists is made of matter and energy. So where science, the scientific method, there's no apparatus, naturalism is related but a little different. That's when you're looking for moral values have to be based in nature. And that's why I say here, how much does justice weigh? What's the wavelength of honesty? It doesn't make any sense. My point is, it's not something physical. So the scientific method can't measure it because there's nothing physical about what I ought to do. Moral values don't have natural properties. But some do say naturalism is it. The other reason why naturalism fails miserably is all the way back David Hume, who was a very well-known Scottish philosopher, book called A Treatise of Human Nature. And of course, British philosopher G.E. Moore in Principia Ethica, this is a long time ago, they developed what's called the naturalistic fallacy. You can't get an ought from an is. You can't get an ought from an is. Just because something occurs in nature doesn't mean it should have behaved otherwise. For example, trees falls where they do. Waterfalls form where they do. Animals are driven by their instincts. Just because animals in nature might kill each other for resources, that's an is statement, they do that, it doesn't mean humans ought to kill each other for resources. That's an ought statement. The same is true for homosexual behavior. Dolphins mate with same sex. So do swans, so do bonobos. Saying something is natural in no way describes what ought to be the case. This is the number one argument for same-sex behavior for non-Christians. It happens in nature all the time. It's only natural. And male lions forcefully copulate with female lions. And no gay person wants to go rape everybody that I've ever met. Oh, no, that's different. It happens in nature all the time. Whales eat fish every day. Should we be cannibals? It happens in nature. Oh, no, it's very different. The point is, it's very different when it doesn't agree with what their moral value is. The point is, nature doesn't tell us what we ought to do. That tree limb fell down. It shouldn't have done it. That rock shouldn't have fallen that way. Their waterfall shouldn't have dropped like that. I mean, this is silly. It's just what nature is. You can't get an ought from it is. So not only are there no physical properties to moral values and duties, which means you can't study them, that's letter A, but there's no there's no physical properties of moral values and duties. Two, just because it happens in nature, you can't get an ought from that, what you should do. And nobody thinks that in the real world. Nobody thinks that. I love, 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 love the fall, and I love pretty trees, and I've got some really pretty trees near our streets, and there's a big yellow tree right by our house, and most of the leaves are off, which is quite depressing. But there was a week ago, and it was beautiful, and it was very windy, and the leaves were just falling down. At no point did I see them go, "Oh, it shouldn't do that." It's so immoral that leaf fell in that spot. I did, however, Bonnie, think, I wish it wouldn't do that because it's so pretty. But all to say, it's not immoral. It's just wind hitting the leaf tree, da-da-da-da. It's the same thing with behavior in nature. So we can't get an ought from it is. That's a naturalistic fallacy if you say otherwise. It just is. So moral values just can't come from that. That doesn't make any sense. And then 3, I say physical determinism, if everything's determined by the laws of physics, it would undermine moral responsibility. Thus, morality is a delusion. I can't help but do otherwise because the non-rational chemical changes in my brain caused by the laws of physics. And that's exactly what a naturalism, if you're a strict naturalist, that's exactly what you believe. People like Sam Harris argue this exactly right, that you think you have free will, but it's just an illusion. It's just an illusion. This is standard. This is standard in atheistic neurophysics, neuropsychology too. And that is, you don't have a free will, you're not conscious, to which I want to say, then who's talking to me right now? The brain in that body is moving the lips. You're not talking to me, the brain in that body. Well, why is the brain in that body moving the lips that way? Because of millions of years of evolutionary forces based calls for the laws of physics, which started back with an impersonal, non-rational Big Bang. Then why in the world would I believe you right now? But they're convinced that they have a free will and they're saying it. They're convinced you're wrong and they're right. They're convinced they had to write books to persuade you. All the while going, but we all know I don't have a free will. So that's the problem with naturalism. If that's true, we're all determined by the laws of physics, then you have no moral responsibility. That's silly to say you ought not kill people. What is that? You ought nothing. You don't have an ought. You don't have a you. You can't help but do it. So there's nothing morally praiseworthy. You told the truth, good for you. Why? They're not good for you. You're controlled like a puppet on the laws of nature strings. So it doesn't make any sense in naturalism. Go ahead.
I'm not having a good day. I'm just a happy chemistry set.
You're a happy chemistry set. Yeah, I'm not having a good day. So logically, this is, well, in my humble opinion, it's gibberish. There are three major reasons why naturalism can't be the source of moral values and duties, and I just told you what they are. And to me, this is devastating. You cannot get moral values and duties from the laws of physics and nature, and I just told you why. It makes no sense whatsoever. If you have to assume a person could do otherwise to attribute guilt or praise, you have to assume that. Little footnote, by the way, or maybe a big footnote, in our judicial system, of course, the United States, we all assume this based on the Christian worldview. When you do not have full responsibility for your actions, it's called diminished responsibility. And so the most extreme form of diminished responsibility is, of course, is insanity. So when you plead insanity, it means I had no control over my actions, which means your actions cannot be guilty. You might still be set aside inside of a psych ward because you were so unstable you might do it again, but it's not because you're guilty. You have to be able to know what you did and that you were doing it to be fully guilty. And if we're all determined by laws of physics, none of us are responsible, which means guilt is an illusion, and so is praiseworthy actions. What a virtuous Mother Teresa is so good. That's an illusion. Hitler was bad. That's an illusion. Hitler had to do it. The laws of physics made him. Mother Teresa had to do that. Jesus had to do that. The laws of physics made him. I don't find that persuasive. I think when we say something is right or wrong, we really are saying something about reality, not, I'm forced to say. I think we really are attributing. I'm going to move ahead unless there's something else there you want to talk about. Anything about that particularly? So you said most laws that we have now are based on Christianity. Were based on Christianity. Do you think that's what's happening, that we're changing our laws based on non-Christian values? Good question. The first statement, most of our laws are based on Christianity. I don't know if I find that persuasive. I would need more evidence. I've never done research to determine whether or not, that our country. Yeah, I would still say I need more evidence. I'm not persuaded that our country ever was founded on Christianity, ever. I know of no evidence for that. Roughly half the people who signed the Declaration were deists. They were not Christians. There are some Judaic Christian values in them, for sure, like designed, given by our Creator with an alien. Our money says one nation under God. Well, that was added in that was added after World War II to fight communism. Yeah, not in 1776. Yeah, in God we trust, that was to be anti-communist. Because communist is Marxist, Marxist is atheistic. So our government was never Christian. That's exactly right. Oh, absolutely right. No, I'm fine. We'll spend a little time on this. The government has never been. That was deliberately to be against what the British did. The British were an overwhelmingly, deliberately Anglican or Church of England. And so one reason they broke off is say, you have to make sure that there's no separation of church and state in the Constitution. That's an idea that expression came later. But that's exactly why they said we were not establishing a religion that all people must follow. Each individual colony had their particular favorite thing. Rhode Island and so forth. You have the Quakers in Pennsylvania had the Quaker state. Rhode Island's, I think, were Baptists. Different people, they kind of, all the little denominations clubbed together originally. But beyond that, that's it. But that's still, the government was saying, no, we're not here to tell you what religion, if any religion, you have to practice. There is no state-sponsored religion. They were trying to escape from that. So absolutely was not Christian. Doesn't mean they were atheistic, just means they were not Christian. At most, they were deist. But many of the founding fathers were Christians, but that doesn't mean the Constitution or America was Christian. It never has been a Christian nation. There's not a lick of evidence for that. Christian country? No, ma'am, never in the history of and maybe I've never seen any evidence to support that claim. I've never seen any evidence of, because if a person means, well, we're primarily Christians, since when? I mean, most of the immigrants that came here were not Christians. A lot of them were Catholics and so forth. Sure, that's right. Certain parts of the original pilgrims were, yes. Certain founders came of religious freedom, that's right. Yep, that's exactly right. But that does not mean the country was Christian. That means certain people who came here were Christian. That's true. Absolutely true. Would it be better off if we were led by a God-led government? My response is absolutely not. We are not. I think we never have been, never should we be a theocracy. We should never be led by priests above us or bishops above us, not as a country. Europe did it and has failed miserably. Failed miserably. They're one of the most unchristian countries now, and they were the most devout, religiously led people for centuries, and it has failed miserably. People do not convert when they're forced to. I want our leaders to be Christian, I want our politicians to be Christian, I would love for that. Sure, to be Christian, but not governing because they're in the role of religious leadership. God should be leading them to their country. I agree. I pray for anybody to be led by the Spirit to make decisions that's best for the church. But as far as people should be elected because they're a great bishop, no, in my opinion, no, no, no. Stay out of it. But I want Christians leading, but the government, I do not want the government telling me what kind of Christian to be. I don't want them to tell me what kind of Christian to be. I didn't say that. So you're saying the government doesn't have any moral value? No, I'm not saying. Well, okay. So in the abstract, that's true. No, I wouldn't even say in the abstract. So my view is, I tend to, because I'm more literal in this sense, the government, of course, just means a word of, at least for America, and I'm way off topic, but America is not a democracy. We hear this all the time. This is basic 101 government. We are a republic. We elect officials to vote for us. We are not a democracy. And so when we say government in the United States, we mean the republic. That is the people we elect to make decisions on our behalf. In that sense, they're a bunch of people, so they do have moral values. Yeah, they do. Even if they say, well, I don't, yeah, you do. I'm convinced you because you're a human being. And so most of the legislation of which I'm aware is predicated upon some type of worldview which assumes some moral values and moral duties. Absolutely, and I said that earlier. Absolutely, I think that's true. I do, which is one of the reasons why I pray often for the Spirit to lead them to help make decisions that are best for the kingdom of God. But that does not mean I want them to legislate how to be a Christian or that I ought to be a Christian. Those are very different things. I want them to stay out of my church. I want them to stay out of my marriage. I want them to stay out of my everything. I want them to stay out. I don't want it. I don't want it. I want the church to be the church is the church, the state is the state. But I do want Christians in politics. I think that's a good thing. I don't envy that position. But bottom line is, maybe back to what you were saying is, there is absolutely a competition of moral values and moral duties in the government. We have Omar blah blah, who's a strict, devout Muslim who married her brother or something. I mean, we have very different values sometimes of whether or not we want to kill all the Jews or not. Christians don't want to kill them, but a huge swath of Muslims do want every Jew on the planet dead. And so I want Christians in our government to pray for and support the victims, not try to kill them. Whatever the state is, whatever part of the world is, that kind of stuff. So I do, but I don't want them to tell me how to go to church. But I'm going to move ahead, and I know. Yes. I think that's true. So let me repeat that from the camera. So the original, we might say, founding fathers had a worldview that, like I said earlier, is more like we call Judeo-Christian. I don't usually use that adjective much because it's usually not accurate, but this is pretty accurate because deism is a belief that there's a God who's somewhat personal, but he kind of leaves us alone. At least they're theists in that sense. But in that sense, Jews and Christians have that in common. We go farther than that. But because of that, however, secondly, many of them were Christians, so their worldview was more that, where today the worldview of, but see, I don't know the statistics. It seems to me to be the case that many of the politicians there are not making decisions predicated upon that worldview. It's tend to be more and more a non-religious worldview. But again, I don't have the data. That seems anecdotal. I can't prove that. So I do think in general, it seems like the worldview is shifting of our government officials, but not fully. I mean, the Speaker of the House is a devout Christian, one just got elected, and so all that to say, people certainly are devout Christians and pray and so forth. And that's great, and anyway, it's a complex. But yeah, I think in general that's true. So we can't. Yeah, they're not. No matter what they say, it seems to me, from a Christian worldview, no one in that elected official, some morally clean slate. They come from a worldview, and they're all assuming certain values and duties. All of them are. And so I would love to have them all being Christian values, but yeah, one nation under God. Yeah, That was written to be anti-communism. Yeah, that happened because you were a child and your parents were afraid of being Marxist. That's where that came from. It was never there until communism. It's based on Marxism and atheistics. They said, nope, we're one nation under God. They put on the dollar, in God we trust. That was all a push. That's why the kids had to stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance. That was all to be anti-communism, every bit of it. You believe in that? Good for you. Good. We don't want to be divided. Yeah, well. Don't we want to love everybody? Sure. I think it's a delusion to think we're one nation under God. I think that's a delusion. I think there's not a shred of evidence to think. I don't think we're one nation on anything. I mean, even Americans don't even pay their taxes. You could say one nation pays their taxes. No, they don't. The last statistic I heard was 30 to 40% of the nation's population pays their taxes, and I'm one of them. There's nothing in this country they all do besides suck off the land or resources. One nation who uses America's resources. Okay, we all do that. We all breathe. I mean, so there's very little things that we all do. An atheist would say, I'm not under God. That's what they would say, I'm not under God. And I'd say, you are, but you don't believe it. And that's fine, but they don't swear allegiance to him. That's why in court they no longer put their hand on the Bible. It's not. They don't do that anymore. Raise your hand or your heart and say, I promise, I swear, you don't put your hand in the Bible anymore. That's gone. It's not authoritative anymore. I would rather them have the freedom to do that than someone to tell me I've got to bow down and swear allegiance to King George. I would. I'd rather live in a country where we can burn our flag, have the freedom to do that, than they tell me that I have to say certain words or I go to jail, like you right now, you do in Australia and Canada. I'll start preaching on that. So I do, okay, let's wrap that up and say, so let's pray as Paul says in Titus. I'll talk about this next week a little bit on the prayer. We do ought to pray for our secular leaders. I do think we ought to. I think we should. I hope they all give their life to Jesus. Good. Okay. Naturalism doesn't work, in my view. So letter C, evolution. So some say, where does morality come from? They say, well, it comes from evolution. It comes from evolution. Well, here are my questions to think this is silly, but here are my questions to evolution. This is a common retort if you talk to an atheist or naturalist. I want to say, how was morality passed on in our genes? I mean, which chromosomes are moral? Morality is not something passed on the DNA. This is nonsense, but this is taught in schools. The reason why we feel something we ought to do is because it's genetics. How was that passed on? Secondly, I would say this would be to deny moral oughtness, because morality no longer means what everyone means by the term. It would mean what we call morals, really just herd instinct or social convention. Morality is an illusion to help us survive, and that's exactly what they say. And that's what they say. My response is, fine, but now you're saying the word moral in a way that no one in the history of the planet's ever used it. No one means that when they say something is moral or good or ought. They mean you really ought. They're appealing to some moral law that's above us. And they go, no, it really just means what the herd wants you to do. Michael Ruse, who grew up in a certain kind of Christian group, and he seems like a real nice guy, but boy, he's annoying to listen to. Yeah. But he's a philosopher of science. You ought to listen to him. He does it, and he seems like a nice guy. But he was on one. I listened to tons of his podcasts and interviews. He's an atheist, and one of them, I think it was Bill Craig. He's got his white shirt, and it cut straight to him. He's in this like on a front porch, going eating his chips. I'm like, dude, come on, we can hear that. He's just chilling. Anyway, so he writes this. This is what Michael Ruse writes. The position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality because such an awareness is of biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than the hands and feet and teeth. They just arose over evolution. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. If that's what you mean by it, it's an illusion. I appreciate that when someone says, it's supposed to be love thy neighbor as thyself, they think they're referring above and beyond themselves. They think that. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation or grounding. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory. It's just illusion. It's just an illusion. So this is what a very common argument. So the reason why we feel like we ought to tell the truth in certain instances is because of millions of years of evolution that helps to survive. And if that's true, I'm saying this is, first off, I don't think that's true at all, but I've told you. So the first two reasons why that's not true, one is morality cannot possibly pass down on the genes. That doesn't make any sense. Two, and now moral means herd instinct or social convention, which is the way no one has ever used the term ever until they came around. That's not what people mean by morality. The third response to this is, this commits what we call speciesism. Speciesism. We love isms in this country. That's the arbitrary superiority of human flourishing. Why is it good that humans save other humans versus worms? That's speciesism. What makes you so special? There's no reason to treat humans as worthy of honor or respect any more than microbes on tree bark. In evolution, there's no reason. And their response to that is, David, yes, there is, because we're more advanced. To which I'm going to say, why does being more advanced make it more valuable? You're creating speciesism. You care about humans more because you are a human. That's no difference caring about white people because you're white, and now you're a racist. You're a speciesist. But everyone thinks that this social herd instinct that keeps me being good to humans is good because it helps humans flourish. Why? There are, I can't remember the last number, something like 100 million times more worms on the earth than humans. Why are we not doing everything it takes to save the worms? I bet $1 for every dumb video I saw about saving a little dog in a cage versus the millions of babies who kill it. Okay, that stuff just drives me. Yeah, I want to save dogs. If we spent the money we spent on it, we go to Florida on the beach, and up and down the beach are these flags littering the beach, special light bulbs of special colors and special everything, so the baby turtles get to come out. It is you'll get in huge trouble if you touch those little turtle nests, and it's amazing. On your way out, you can kill all the babies you want, but don't you touch those turtles. We're the back. So that's speciesism. It's speciesism to say humans are more special. That makes no sense in evolutionary ethics. That makes no sense. You're arbitrarily choosing that. And I'm going to say, why do that? Don't you care about surviving? That's not what I said. I didn't say, do I care about it? I said, why is it better? Why is it morally better to preserve human life than a worm? There is no argument. There's no grounding that. You just say, I just believe it. Fine, right, but that doesn't make it better. The fourth response is, we are advanced primates on a speck of dust. What possible reason would I need to be moral if your survival got in the way of mine? Since the goal is survival, and it is if you're an atheist, if you're a naturalist, at hardcore, that's the goal. Why not get rid of every person who gets in my way and steal, lie, rape, pillage, exterminate whole people groups? Since it helps guarantee my survival. This doesn't mean that evolutionists are necessarily more likely to murder or steal. It means there's no moral ground not to do it. Why is what Hitler did wrong? I mean, I've heard naturalists say, well, I can't say that. I've seen interviews on the street. Is it true that what Hitler is wrong? I wouldn't do it. Why wouldn't you do it? I mean, I wouldn't do that, but what Hitler did, is it wrong? And they'll go, well, I can't say that. I've heard real normal people on the street interview. They can't say that. And you have to say that if all we have are herd instinct, because then all you have to do is rise to power and control the cultural herd. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. But if that's all we are, why in the world, what possible difference would it make if I stole everything I saw? And we all go, well, you shouldn't do that. Yeah, I should. I mean, think about it. Everything, drip water you take is away from my water, my kids' water. Every food you eat, that could have been my resource. All those apple pies Becky keeps making, those are my apple pies. And that's just the God honest truth. Those are mine, and I don't know what's wrong with you. But on evolutionary terms, there's no reason not to do that. But if you say that, then you've completely disregarded everything we say about morality. because everyone knows it's wrong to do that. So why would herd instinct tell me to do something that says it's wrong when I should be doing it if it's going to help me survive?
That's just survival of the fittest.
It's survival of the fittest. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what Hitler said. That's the origin of eugenics, right? The pure blood, pure genes. And so what happened when evolution, the theory of evolution, which now isn't so much, well, okay, I won't get all that. So when evolution came along, the next stage is what we call social Darwinism, that cultures and civilizations are more superior than others, not just individual specimens of, living organisms, but now whole people groups. And so social Darwinism took on certain philosophical schools of thought. And so to help social Darwinism, help civilization, they developed this thing called eugenics, where you want to kill off all the weak babies or whatever you think is weak. So that would be black people, Jews, gypsies, whatever in Europe, and include eugenics. And so the woman who started Planned Parenthood was a hardcore eugenicist. I mean, she wrote all kinds of letters. This isn't some conspiracy theory. This is well known. Her chief goal was to get rid of black people. And it almost worked. She almost did it. She almost did it. 7 out of 10 black babies are killed in the womb. She targeted black neighborhoods because she was convinced at the time period there was one movement that believed they weren't fully human, their brains were different, their heads were different. Just stupid nonsense. It's exactly what they said about the Jews, and they killed them all off. The Nazis did. Well, that was eugenics. They cut off the Jews because they said, it despoils our race and you interbreed with them. And that's why it was illegal to have sex with a Jew. They did it all the time. But that's why it was illegal, because now you're interbreeding this horrible, bringing the civilization down, and we've got to survive. And that's Mein Kampf, my struggle. I've got to beat them all. I'm not saying, and it is simply not true, that if you're an evolutionist, you're a Hitler and you Nazi. No. No. Praise God, they're all not that way. It's funny, Richard Dawkins says this in his book, that he calls it the selfish gene. The gene just exists to take over and survive and do whatever it takes to survive. And your gene will make you want to be selfish and all this. He says, but we know we shouldn't do that. He says that. Why? How do we know that? Where did that come from? And why should we not be selfish? Give me a break. And he'll say, and that's why we have every reason to deplore what the Nazis did. Why? You just told me humans by nature are selfish and ought to be, but then we shouldn't be. I get mad about it because the consequences of that philosophy, the consequences can lead toward the attempt to exterminate whole people groups. It is just so wretched and horrible. I'm not, again, one more time for icing on the cake, it is not true that all evolutionists want to go kill all the people. And that's not true at all. And that's what I'm saying, praise God they don't. But they have no moral grounding not to do it. If I said, why not? What's the real answer? Their answer is, I can't tell you why not do it. I just have to go find a culture that agrees with me. And then, oh, good, we're all in this together, good. But that's what I want to do. Yeah.
I just have to say, it just goes back to evolution versus the Bible.
So you said it just goes back to the evolution versus the Bible.
In society now.
Okay. I have a different view than that, but okay, I hear you. Good. Any other questions about that? Or comments? Any other questions or comments about that? Okay, so that's the third major thing that people are source of grounding. So the first one is the scientific method. And I'd say that makes no sense. We have no apparatus to discover that. 2, you might say, well, naturalism. That is, everything is made of just laws of physics. Everything is made of matter or energy. Those are interchangeable. And so everything really comes down to the laws of physics and matter. And I give response to that. The third major source of morality that people say is evolutionary, to which I've attempted to debunk. These are gigantic problems for the evolutionist. I don't find it persuasive. A fourth area that people say moral values and duties are grounded in this, that's Platonism. Platonism because it comes from Plato, of course. And this is the theory that numbers or other abstract objects, like moral values, they're objective, timeless entities, independent of the physical world, and the symbols used to describe them. It's hard to describe, but Plato believed that, and so they're called moral Platonists. There are some professors in the world who are moral Platonists. There aren't tons of them, but they're there. It's gotten a little more popular in philosophical schools these days who are arguing that moral values they're objective, timeless, abstract objects. They exist in reality. They're not necessarily past Mars, but they're real. They'll say, just like 2 + 2 = 4, 4 is real, and so is honesty. And there's huge problems with this, like how would they exist? Where'd they come from? And then most importantly, why does an abstract object that's out floating in abstract land, how does it tell me what to do? Where does the oughtness come from? And why would I listen to it? There's an abstract honesty called tell the truth. Okay, I ought to do that. Why? Well, yeah. What plus what equals truth? So, a moral Platonist will stand here and say, David, you're not giving a robust, but in a nutshell, this is a great summary. A moral Platonist is a person who believes that moral values and duties are abstract objects. They're not personal, they're not inside of you. They would agree with the average Christian. Some Christians can be moral Platonists, some are. But in general, we're not. In general, most Christians historically have not been Platonists. They're this fifth option, which I'll tell you in a second. But that the Platonists say, well, we agree it's out there. We're appealing to some out there, these abstract properties. But most Christians are not that Platonists for that reason, because where they come from and why are they there and why should I listen to them and why do they feel to my ought to? And that's a moral Platonism. The last option we're going to cover is what, historically speaking, most Christians throughout time have agreed to. That doesn't mean it's true, but it is by far the most common view. It's certainly my view. I'm absolutely a divine command theorist. Absolutely. So what I'll do is, if there's no more questions or comments, I'll start this. How about that? Any questions or comments about this? Can you go over anything I've covered so far? For those that came here? There's some more handouts back there if you want them on the table. If you don't have a handout. Can I go ahead? Anybody else? Go ahead, Julia. Say that one more time. There are people? Good. Physical things like honesty? No, not physical. Good question. Not physical, but objective. They do exist. For example, I'm a mind-body dualist as a Christian. I believe that you and I are a soul with a body. Our soul is not physical. It does exist. It's objective. Objective means it exists independent of my personal feelings or thoughts or awareness. This stand is objective. If I were blind, it still exists. If I couldn't touch it, if I didn't know it was here and I turned it still exists. You would know it still exists because it has properties, not just physical. It has properties. The soul exists, even though it's not physical. They would say the same thing about honesty, truth, don't betray. They would say they're objective truths of reality. The difference, how is it different from how we view? I'm not sure how you view it, but yeah, so the difference is, that's a good question. So that's a good question. So the difference is in this context now is of grounding. So we're trying to answer the question, remember back to moral ontology, where does it come from? Where does it come from? The difference is, in my view, I don't think honesty and so forth comes from abstract objects that are just out in reality somewhere. I think they come from God. And I'll explain that more in a second. So we sound similar in how we talk, oughtness and should. The question is the grounding. Why? Where does the good come from? They're going to say it comes from these abstract objects. To which I say, where are they? Where do they come from? Why do they tell me what to do? Why should I obey them? That doesn't make any sense to me. So they're not physical. Good question. Anything else about that? Okay, I'm going to move into the last thing. This is what we call divine command theory. This is, in my opinion, very helpful. And so we'll do a few minutes on this and we'll come back. Divine command theory is a meta-ethical theory, right, which proposes that an act is morally obligatory, you ought to do it, it's permissible, or it's forbidden, solely because of God's will or his command. Sometimes we say God's fiat, his commandment. In other words, What is morally right or wrong depends entirely on what God commands or forbids. If he said do it, it's good. If he said don't do it, it's bad. That's in a nutshell what divine command theory is. Something is good because God commands it. Something's bad because he says don't do it. He forbids it. Okay, but what makes it morally right or wrong? Because he said do it, or because it comes from his character? What makes it right or wrong? Because he said do it, or because it comes from his character? We're going to unpack all that. But that's a divine command theory. And that's exactly whatever, that's my view. Okay, all right, so here's the answer. Well, it depends how you answer the question. If moral values come from his will, what he declares, that's called volunteerism. Everything has a name. If moral values come from his character, that's called essentialism. What does that mean? What does that mean? Okay. Divine volunteerism is the position that things are morally good or evil just because God wills them to be so. An action is morally right because God commands it, and an action is wrong because God forbids it. Volunteerism seems to make moral values arbitrary. For example, God could will certain behaviors randomly or arbitrarily, like commanding some people to rape. And so why is it wrong to rape? Because God said don't do it. But he told me to do it. Oh, well, then you should have done it. It'd be the right thing to do. That'd be volunteerism. If he told you to do it, it's the right thing to do. So the response that people give is, yeah, but doesn't it seem like God could just willy-nilly change his mind whatever he wants? And they would say, yes, he can. He's God. And if he says do it, you need to do it, and it's the right thing to do. If he says go steal it, go steal it. If he told you don't steal it, don't steal. Rightness and wrongness is determined purely by his commandments. That's volunteerism. Essentialism is different. It's the position that moral truths and values are grounded in the very nature or essence of God, essentially in his character, essentialism. That is, something is good not simply because God commands it, but because it reflects God's inherently good nature. God is by nature essentially good, loving, kind, faithful, just, loyal, truthful, etc. et al. In Christianity, he is. God's nature, his character, is the standard of the morality of an action. Moreover, God's nature is unchanging and eternal. This means that what's morally good isn't subject to change, as it's based on the immutable nature of God. It means he's not going to say, don't rape, you should rape. That comes from his character, which doesn't change. Moral values are logically necessary and therefore exist in all possible worlds. There's no situation where it's good to betray, because God doesn't betray. There's no possible world in which God lacks these properties and does not exist, period. So I like how William Lane Craig says it, because I find this very persuasive. This is exactly my view. So William Lane Craig, or his Bill Craig, he's a Christian philosopher and theologian. He says this way, quote, I see moral duties as rooted in God's commands, his commandments. Moral values are rooted in the nature of God. So where does honesty come from? It's grounded in God, because God's honest. Why should I tell the truth? Because God said so. Now, I'm going to unpack that next week, and we'll talk about that, because this is a really, really important point I want you to get, so we're not going to rush to this next part. So reflect on such things. Pray for our political leaders. Don't kill Jews. What are the takeaways? Love our neighbor as yourself. Live like chimpanzees. And let's go, let me say a quick prayer. We thank you, Lord Jesus, so much for a chance to reflect on these things. Please help us keep reflecting on them so we might understand you better and explain you better to those who seek to know you. In the name of Jesus, we pray. All God's people said.